The silence stretched across the Afghan valley like a funeral shroud, broken only by the labored breathing of 8 Navy SEALs pressed against jagged rocks. Staff Sergeant Marcus Reeves adjusted his grip on his rifle, sweat cutting tracks through the dust caked on his face despite the mountain cold. 3 hours ago, their extraction bird had been shot down by a surface-to-air missile they never saw coming. Now Taliban fighters moved through the canyon below like hunting wolves, their AK-47s glinting in the pale morning light. "Control, this is Viper 6, Reeves whispered into his radio, voice barely audible. "We are pinned down, grid reference 419276, heavy enemy contact. Request immediate close air support, over." Static crackled back. "Viper 6 control, all fixed-wing assets are committed. Stand by for alternate support." Reeves closed his eyes. In the distance, he could hear truck engines rumbling closer. The Taliban weren't just hunting them anymore, they were surrounding them. His team had maybe an hour before this rocky outcrop became their tomb. He'd led these men through hell and back across 3 deployments, but this felt different. This felt final. "Sir," whispered Petty Officer First Class Rivera, pointing toward the valley mouth. "Movement at 2 o'clock. Looks like a technical with a mounted 50 cal." Through his scope, Reeves counted at least 40 hostiles converging on their position. The mathematical reality was brutal. 8 Americans with limited ammunition against an army that had home field advantage and all day to work with. He'd seen this movie before, and it never ended well. The radio crackled again. "Viper 6 control, be advised, Hog 27 is inbound to your location. Stand by for contact." Reeves frowned. Hog meant A-10 Thunderbolt, the Air Force's tank-killing machine. But he'd never heard that specific call sign before, and something in the controller's tone seemed uncertain, almost apologetic. In 15 years of special operations, he'd learned to read between the lines of military communications. This didn't sound like their usual close air support. "Control, confirm Hog 27. What's their ETA?" "Hog 27, 2 minutes out, be advised." The transmission cut short, replaced by dead air. In the growing silence, Reeves could hear his heartbeat thundering against his ribs. 2 minutes felt like a lifetime when death was climbing toward you up a mountainside. He looked at his men, faces he'd known for years, warriors who'd followed him into the darkest corners of the world without question. They deserved better than dying in this forgotten valley. Then he heard it, the distinctive growl of twin General Electric turbofans echoing off canyon walls, the sound that had saved countless ground troops across 2 decades of warfare. But as the aircraft emerged through the mountain fog, something seemed different about this particular angel of death. The morning mist clung to the valley walls like cigarette smoke in a dive bar, and through it came the unmistakable silhouette of an A-10 Thunderbolt II. But this wasn't the typical close air support mission that Reeves had witnessed dozens of times before. The aircraft's approach seemed more deliberate, almost surgical in its precision. The pilot was taking time to assess the battlefield, circling once at a respectful distance before committing to the attack run. "Viper 6 Hog 27, I have eyes on your position. Can you mark your location with smoke?" The voice that crackled through Reeves' headset caught him off guard. Female, calm, professional. In all his years working with Air Force close air support, he'd never had a female A-10 pilot overhead. The realization shouldn't have mattered, bullets didn't discriminate, but something about the situation felt historically significant. "Hog 27, this is Viper 6, popping smoke now." Reeves pulled the pin on a purple smoke grenade and tossed it 15 meters from their position. The colored smoke billowed up against the rocky outcrop, a violet beacon in the gray morning light. "Good copy, purple smoke. I count approximately 40 enemy personnel in your vicinity. Confirm you are the only friendlies in the valley." "Affirmative, Hog 27. We are the only blue forces, everything else is hostile." Through his binoculars, Reeves watched the A-10 bank left, its twin engines singing that familiar song of salvation. The aircraft was painted in standard Air Force gray, no special markings visible, but there was something different about how this pilot flew. Smooth, confident, like she'd been doing this particular dance for years. The Taliban fighters below had spotted the aircraft now. Some were running for cover, others were setting up anti-aircraft positions. Reeves could see RPG teams moving into position, and somewhere in the valley, a heavy machine gun started chattering, not at the SEALs, but skyward, hopping to bring down their salvation before it could work its magic. Viper 6, I'm going to make my first pass from east to west, danger close. Keep your heads down and enjoy the show. The A-10 lined up for its attack run, nose dropping slightly as it dove toward the valley floor. Reeves had seen this before, but never from this angle, never as the guy whose life depended on the pilot's precision. The aircraft grew larger in his field of vision, and he could see the GAU-8 cannon's 7 barrels spinning up underneath the nose. Then the world exploded in thunder. The 30 depleted uranium rounds hit the Taliban positions like the fist of God, each one capable of punching through tank armor. The sound was indescribable, not just loud, but felt in your bones, in your teeth, in places you didn't know sound could reach. The famous BRRRT that had become legend among ground troops, but magnified by the canyon walls into something primordial and terrifying. Dust and smoke erupted from the enemy positions. Bodies and equipment flew through the air like toys. In 15 seconds of gunfire, the pilot had transformed the valley floor from a death trap into a graveyard. But she wasn't finished. The A-10 pulled up and banked right, already lining up for a second pass. Through the chaos and smoke, Reeves could see surviving Taliban fighters scrambling for new cover, their coordinated assault dissolving into panicked retreat. The technical with the mounted machine gun was now burning wreckage, its crew scattered like leaves in a hurricane. "Hog 27, that was beautiful work," Reeves called into his radio, genuine admiration in his voice. "You just saved 8 American lives." "Just doing my job, Viper 6, but we're not done yet. I've got eyes on a second group of hostiles moving up the north slope. They're trying to flank your position." Reeves spun toward the north, scanning through his scope. Sure enough, he could see muzzle flashes and movement about 400 meters up the mountainside. Taliban fighters who'd been smart enough to stay out of the valley floor were now attempting to gain high ground advantage. Without air support, his team would have been caught in a deadly crossfire. They came around for another attack run, this time approaching from the south. The pilot's voice remained steady, professional, almost conversational despite the violence she was orchestrating below. "This pass is going to be rockets. Same drill, keep your heads down until I'm clear." Reeves watched the aircraft line up its shot. The pilot was threading a needle here, striking targets on a steep mountainside without risking the ordnance rolling downhill toward the SEAL's position. It required not just skill, but an intimate understanding of physics, trajectory, and mountain warfare tactics. The Hydra 70 rockets streaked from their pods like angry hornets, each one finding its mark with surgical precision. The mountainside erupted in a chain of explosions, orange fireballs blooming against gray stone. The Taliban flanking maneuver disappeared in smoke and thunder, another tactical advantage erased by American airpower and pilot expertise. In the sudden quiet that followed, Reeves realized something had fundamentally changed. The valley that had been their prison was now their sanctuary. The hunters had become the hunted, and somewhere above them, circling like a protective angel, was a pilot whose skill had just rewritten the rules of engagement. "Viper 6 Hog 27, I'm showing all threats neutralized in your immediate area. What's your status?" "Hog 27, we are secure. Outstanding work up there. That was some of the finest close air support I've ever witnessed." There was a pause before the pilot responded, and when she did, there was something different in her tone. Warmer, more personal. Copy that, Viper 6. I'm going to orbit overhead until your extraction arrives. Nobody else is dying in this valley today. The extraction bird arrived 40 minutes later, a Chinook helicopter with fighter escort, thundering over the mountains like mechanized cavalry. As Reeves and his team prepared to move to the landing zone, he found himself looking up at the A-10 still circling protectively overhead. The pilot had stayed, burning fuel and risking enemy reinforcements, just to make sure they got home safely. It was the kind of commitment that went beyond duty, beyond mission parameters. It was personal. Hog 27, Viper 6, we're moving to extract now. Thanks for keeping the wolves away. My pleasure, Viper 6. Fair winds and following seas. The radio protocol was perfect, but there was something in those final words that stuck with Reeves as he loaded onto the Chinook. Fair winds and following seas was Navy tradition, not Air Force. This pilot knew exactly who she'd been protecting, and she'd chosen her farewell accordingly. As the helicopter lifted off, Reeves caught one last glimpse of the A-10 through the cargo window. The aircraft waggled its wings once, a pilot's salute, before turning south toward base. He made a mental note to find out who Hog 27 was when they got back to Bagram. Warriors like that deserved recognition. What he didn't know was that he just witnessed something that would become legend. Something that would be talked about in ready rooms and briefing tents across Afghanistan. Something that would change how people thought about close air support, about precision under pressure, and about who could be trusted when American lives hung in the balance. The pilot's name was Captain Raven Blackfeather, and this mission was about to make her famous for all the wrong reasons. 3 days later, Reeves sat in the intelligence debrief room at Bagram Airfield, still trying to process what had happened in that valley. The after-action report would show that Hog 27 had expended 64 rounds of 30 ammunition and 8 Hydra rockets, eliminating 43 enemy combatants without a single case of friendly fire or collateral damage. Numbers like that didn't happen by accident. Major Patricia Hendricks, the intelligence officer conducting the debrief, slid a photograph across the metal table. It showed an A-10 Thunderbolt II with the tail number 7080691 and the words "Warthog's Revenge" painted below the cockpit alongside 12 small bomb symbols. "This is your close air support from Monday," she said matter-of-factly. "Piloted by Captain Raven Blackfeather, 355th Fighter Squadron. Ring any bells?" Reeves studied the photo. The aircraft looked exactly like what he'd seen through the mountain fog, but something about Hendrick's tone suggested there was more to the story. "Should it ring bells, ma'am?" Hendricks leaned back in her chair, a slight smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "Captain Blackfeather is, how should I put this, somewhat controversial around here. She's been in-country for 8 months, and she's already racked up more confirmed kills than pilots who have been flying combat missions for 3 years. Sounds like someone we want on our side." "That's the problem. Not everyone sees it that way." Hendricks pulled out another file, this one significantly thicker. "Blackfeather came to us from the Nevada Air National Guard. Before that, she was Marine Corps, flew Harriers in Iraq during the initial invasion. Got shot down in 2003, spent 4 days behind enemy lines before Marine Recon pulled her out." Reeves raised an eyebrows. Cross-service transfers were rare, especially for pilots, and surviving 4 days in hostile territory took a special kind of toughness. "Why the transfer to Air Force?" "That's where it gets complicated." Hendricks opened the file, revealing a stack of commendation letters, incident reports, and what looked like disciplinary actions. After Iraq, she came back stateside and became a test pilot. Flew experimental aircraft for 3 years, set several speed and altitude records, but she also had a habit of pushing boundaries. The major slid over an incident report dated 2 years earlier. The header read, "Unauthorized low-level flight over civilian population, Captain R. Blackfeather." She was supposed to be testing avionics upgrades over the Nevada desert. Instead, she decided to buzz a small town where a Marine veteran was being buried. Flew the missing man formation solo, about 200 feet over the cemetery. Nearly got court-martialed. Reeves read through the report. The veteran had been her former wingman in Iraq, killed in a motorcycle accident after coming home from the war. Blackfeather had requested permission to participate in the funeral flyover and been denied due to weather conditions, so she'd done it anyway. What was her punishment? That's the interesting part. The Marine's family requested that all charges be dropped, said it meant everything to them. The local newspaper picked up the story, and suddenly she was a folk hero. The Air Force couldn't exactly court-martial someone for honoring a fallen Marine, even if she'd violated about 17 different regulations doing it. Hendricks pulled out a newspaper clipping with the headline, "Pilot HONORS Fallen Marine with Unauthorized Flyover." The photo showed Blackfeather in dress uniform, standing next to an A-10, her expression serious but unapologetic. So they sent her here instead. Not exactly. She volunteered, said she wanted to fly combat missions where her skills could make a difference. The Air Force figured Afghanistan was a good place to channel her enthusiasm. Reeves studied the photograph more carefully. Captain Blackfeather appeared to be in her early 30s, with sharp features and dark eyes that seemed to look straight through the camera. Her ribbon rack showed a Purple Heart, Distinguished Flying Cross, and several other decorations that indicated serious combat experience. What's the controversy about? Hendricks closed the file with a snap. Some of the other pilots think she's reckless, shows off, takes unnecessary risks to pad her kill count. There have been complaints about her methods, suggestions that she's not a team player. And what do you think? The intelligence officer was quiet for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. I think the 8 Navy SEALs who walked out of that valley alive probably don't give a damn about her methods. But politics is politics, even in a war zone. Reeves left the debrief with more questions than answers. The pilot who'd saved his team was apparently viewed as both a hero and a liability, depending on who you asked. But numbers didn't lie. 43 enemy combatants eliminated without friendly casualties spoke to skill, not recklessness. That evening, he made his way to the flight line, hopping to catch a glimpse of the famous Captain Blackfeather. The Air Force side of Bagram was a maze of hangars, maintenance areas, and flight operations buildings, all buzzing with activity as crews prepared for night missions. He found her at the weapons loading area, supervising the arming of her for another close air support mission. Even from a distance, she commanded attention, not just because she was the only woman in a group of male maintainers, but because of how she carried herself. Confident, professional, completely at home in an environment that many would find intimidating. Reeves watched as she performed her pre-flight inspection, running her hands along control surfaces, checking weapons mounts, examining every rivet and panel with the thoroughness of someone whose life depended on mechanical perfection. This wasn't someone cutting corners or taking unnecessary risks. This was a professional at the top of her game. "You must be one of the SEALs from Monday." The voice startled him. He turned to find Captain Blackfeather approaching, her flight suit unzipped at the top, helmet tucked under her arm. Up close, she was smaller than he'd expected, maybe 5'6", but there was an intensity in her dark eyes that made her seem larger than life. "Staff Sergeant Reeves, ma'am, I wanted to thank you for what you did up there." She shook his offered hand with a grip that was surprisingly strong. "Just doing my job, Sergeant. How are your men?" "Alive, thanks to you. That was some impressive flying." A slight smile crossed her face. "I had good targets and clear weather. Makes the job easier." There was something humble in her response that contradicted everything he'd heard about her supposed ego. This wasn't someone bragging about her kill count or seeking praise for heroics. She was treating the rescue like routine business, even though they both knew it had been anything but routine. I hear you transferred from the Marines. Guilty as charged. Once a Marine, always a Marine, but the Air Force has better toys. She gestured toward the A-10 behind her. The Warthog is the finest close air support platform ever built. When ground troops need help, this is what they want to see coming over the horizon. How long have you been flying them? About 2 years in the Air Force, but I've been studying close air support tactics my whole career. The A-10 is different from anything else in the inventory. It's built around that gun, designed from the ground up to kill tanks and support infantry. Most pilots see it as old and slow, but I see it as perfect for the job. A crew chief approached with a clipboard. "Ma'am, your bird is loaded and ready. 12 Mavericks, full gun, and enough fuel for 3 hours on station." "Thanks, Chief." She turned back to Reeves. "I've got to go earn my pay. There's another unit in contact about 50 miles north of here." As she walked toward her aircraft, Reeves called after her. "Captain, why'd you really leave the Marines?" She stopped and turned back, considering the question. For the first time, he saw something vulnerable in her expression. "I lost too many good Marines in Iraq because we didn't have adequate close air support. Harriers are great, but they're not built for loitering over a battlefield, providing sustained fire support. I swore that if I ever got the chance to be the person other people called when they needed help, I'd be the best at it that I could possibly be." She climbed into the cockpit and fired up the twin turbofans. As the A-10 taxied toward the runway, Reeves understood something that the critics back at headquarters didn't. This wasn't about ego or kill counts or personal glory. This was about preventing other young Americans from dying far from home because the cavalry didn't arrive in time. Captain Raven Blackfeather wasn't reckless. She was relentless. And in a war where good people died for bad reasons every day, that might just be exactly what was needed. The next morning brought unwelcome news. Reeves was summoned to Colonel Matthews' office, where the base commander's expression suggested this wouldn't be a social call. Matthews was old-school infantry, a man who'd earned his stars in Iraq and Afghanistan through decisive leadership and an intolerance for political games. "Sergeant, I understand you've been asking questions about Captain Blackfeather." "Yes, sir. She saved my team's lives. I wanted to understand who we were dealing with." Matthews gestured to a chair across from his desk. "Sit down. We need to talk." The office walls were covered with photographs from Matthews' career, images of soldiers in combat, award ceremonies, and the kind of formal portraits that marked a man's rise through the ranks. But the expression on his face suggested this conversation would be more candid than formal. "What did you think of the captain?" "Honestly, sir, most professional pilot I've ever worked with. Precise, effective, and genuinely concerned about ground troop safety. My team owes her our lives." "That's the problem." Matthews leaned back in his chair, suddenly looking tired. 3 days ago, I received a formal complaint from Lieutenant Colonel Harrison at Wing Headquarters. Seems some of his pilots have concerns about Blackfeather's tactics. Reeves felt a knot forming in his stomach. What kind of concerns? The usual bullshit. She's too aggressive, doesn't follow standard procedures, makes other pilots look bad by comparison. Matthews pulled out a folder and tossed it on the desk. "According to this report, she's potentially dangerous to overall mission effectiveness due to her tendency toward individualistic decision-making." The words hit Reeves like a physical blow. The pilot who'd saved 8 American lives was being criticized for the very qualities that had made her successful. "Sir, with respect, that's garbage. She followed proper procedures throughout the engagement. Her communication was textbook perfect, her target identification was flawless, and her weapons employment was surgical. If that's dangerous, then I don't understand combat aviation." "You don't have to convince me, Sergeant. I've read the after-action reports. I've seen the gun camera footage. What she did in that valley was masterpiece-level close air support. Matthews stood and walked to the window overlooking the flight line. But perception is reality in the military, and right now the perception is that Captain Blackfeather is a cowboy who puts personal glory ahead of team cohesion. What does that mean for her? It means she's being transferred. Harrison wants her moved to a different squadron, somewhere her disruptive influence won't affect unit morale. The injustice of it was staggering. A pilot who'd performed flawlessly under pressure was being punished for making her colleagues uncomfortable. Reeves had seen this before in special operations. Sometimes the most effective warriors were also the most threatening to mediocre performers who preferred the safety of average. "Colonel, is there anything we can do? Some way to document what really happened up there?" Matthews turned back from the window, and for the first time Reeves saw something like anger in the older man's eyes. "I'm glad you asked, because it turns out there might be." The colonel pulled out another file, this one marked with classified stamps and official seals. 2 days ago, I received a call from General Morrison at CENTCOM. Seems word of your rescue made it all the way up the chain. The general was curious about this Captain Blackfeather who'd eliminated 43 enemy combatants without any collateral damage. What did you tell him? The truth. That she's the finest close air support pilot I've seen in 25 years of military service. That my ground commanders specifically request her when they're planning dangerous operations. And that some re-echelon politicians want to transfer her because she makes them nervous. Matthews opened the classified file and slid a document across the desk. General Morrison has approved a special assignment. Captain Blackfeather is being temporarily detached to a Joint Special Operations Task Force. She'll be providing dedicated air support for the most sensitive missions in theater. Reeves read the orders, hardly believing what he was seeing. Instead of being punished, Captain Blackfeather was being promoted to the big leagues, the kind of assignments reserved for the absolute best of the best. The general specifically requested that you and your team serve as liaisons for the program. Seems he wants ground truth from people who have actually worked with her in combat. As Reeves left the colonel's office, he realized something significant was happening. The bureaucrats might want to sideline Captain Blackfeather, but the warriors who actually fought the war recognized her value. In the complex politics of military service, sometimes talent found a way to rise above the noise. That evening he found a handwritten note in his quarters. The message was brief. "Sergeant Reeves, thank you for your support. It means more than you know. Semper Fi. R.B." Somehow, Captain Blackfeather had learned about the conversation with Colonel Matthews. In a world where information traveled at the speed of gossip, news of her new assignment would already be making the rounds. But she'd taken the time to personally thank a ground pounder who'd stuck his neck out for her. It was the kind of gesture that separated true leaders from mere rank holders, and it convinced Reeves that wherever this Joint Special Operations assignment took them, working with Captain Raven Blackfeather was going to be anything but ordinary. The briefing room at Task Force 31's compound was unlike anything Reeves had seen in his military career. Located in a nondescript building on the edge of Bagram, it looked more like a corporate conference room than a military facility. The walls were covered with high-resolution monitors displaying real-time intelligence feeds, satellite imagery, and tactical overlays that updated constantly with new information. Around the polished wood table sat representatives from every branch of military special operations: Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, Marine Force Reconnaissance, Air Force Pararescue, and Delta Force. These were the people who handled missions too sensitive or too dangerous for conventional forces. And according to the briefing packet, Captain Blackfeather would be their dedicated air support. Lieutenant Colonel James Morrison, the general's son, Reeves noted, ran the meeting with the efficiency of someone accustomed to dealing with elite units. He was younger than expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of casual confidence that came from proving yourself in the field before earning the right to send others into harm's way. Ladies and gentlemen, Operation Nightwatch is designed to eliminate high-value targets throughout Regional Command East. These are individuals whose removal will significantly degrade Taliban operational capability in the region. Morrison clicked to the first slide, showing photographs and intelligence profiles of 10 different men. Each target represents a specific tactical challenge requiring precise coordination between ground and air assets. The photos were the usual collection of bearded faces and suspicious stares, but the intelligence summaries told a different story. These weren't random insurgents. They were bomb makers, facilitators, and operational commanders whose activities had directly resulted in American casualties. Our air support for this operation will be provided by Captain Raven Blackfeather, 355th Fighter Squadron. Captain Blackfeather comes highly recommended by ground commanders and has demonstrated exceptional skill in close air support operations. Morrison clicked to the next slide, showing Captain Blackfeather's service record. The list of accomplishments was impressive: Distinguished Flying Cross, Purple Heart, Aerial Achievement Medal with 3 oak leaf clusters, and combat statistics that made her one of the most lethal pilots in theater. I understand there have been some concerns about Captain Blackfeather's methods. Let me be clear, this task force doesn't care about politics or personality conflicts. We care about results. Captain Blackfeather produces results. A Delta Force major raised his hand. Sir, what's our operational timeline? First mission launches tomorrow night. Target Package Alpha, Abdul Razak Ahmed, bomb maker responsible for the IED attacks along Highway 1. Intelligence indicates he's holed up in a compound about 30 miles southwest of here, surrounded by approximately 20 armed guards. Morrison clicked to a satellite image showing a walled compound in mountainous terrain. The buildings were clustered around a central courtyard, with obvious defensive positions and multiple escape routes. It was the kind of target that required surgical precision. Too much firepower would destroy the intelligence value. Too little would get the assault team killed. Ground element will be a joint SEAL Delta team, call sign Reaper. Air support will be Hog 27, with backup from Apache gunships if needed. Mission timeline is 48 hours from initiation to extraction. Reeves studied the target photos and felt the familiar pre-mission tension building in his chest. This was different from the Valley Rescue. This was offensive operations, going into enemy territory to kill specific people for specific reasons. The stakes were higher, the risks more calculated, and the margin for error essentially zero. After the briefing, he found Captain Blackfeather in the mission planning room, studying satellite imagery with the intensity of a scholar examining ancient texts. She traded her flight suit for civilian clothes, jeans, and a black t-shirt that made her look more like a graduate student than a combat pilot. Sergeant, ready for tomorrow night? Yes, ma'am. Looking forward to working with you again. She looked up from the photos, and he saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there during their first meeting. A kind of focused intensity that suggested she understood exactly what this assignment meant for her career. This is different from the Valley, she said quietly. That was reactive, Americans in trouble, clear good guys and bad guys. This is proactive hunting. Some people have moral qualms about that. And you don't. I lost friends to IEDs built by people like Ahmad. As far as I'm concerned, killing him before he kills more American soldiers is a moral imperative. She turned back to the satellite photos. The question is whether we can do it cleanly, without collateral damage or unnecessary risk to the ground team. Reeves looked at the imagery over her shoulder. The compound was surrounded by civilian buildings, a mosque, a market, residential areas where innocent people lived their lives. One misplaced bomb or poorly timed gun run could turn a surgical strike into a massacre. What's your approach? Low and slow. The A-10 was designed for this kind of work, precision engagement in complex terrain. I'll loiter at altitude until you need me, then come down fast and hit exactly what you tell me to hit. She pointed to specific buildings in the compound. Primary target is here in the main house. If Ahmed tries to run, secondary positions are here and here. But we do this clean or we don't do it at all. It was exactly what Reeves wanted to hear. Professional, precise, focused on mission success rather than personal glory. Whatever critics might say about Captain Blackfeather's methods, her priorities were clearly in the right place. One more thing, Sergeant. She turned to face him directly. I know some people think I'm reckless or unpredictable, that I take unnecessary risks for personal reasons. I want you to know that when your lives are on the line, I'm the most careful pilot in the Air Force. Your safety is more important to me than any target, any mission, any career advancement. Are we clear on that? Crystal clear, ma'am. As he left the planning room, Reeves reflected on the strange journey that had brought them to this point. 3 weeks ago, he'd never heard of Captain Raven Blackfeather. Now, he was about to trust her with his life and the lives of his teammates on one of the most dangerous missions of his career. But somehow, that trust felt completely natural. In a world full of politicians and bureaucrats, she was a warrior. And when warriors worked together, extraordinary things became possible. The pre-dawn darkness hung over Bagram like a heavy blanket as the assault team conducted final equipment checks. Reeves adjusted the straps on his body armor, testing the weight distribution of ammunition, medical supplies, and communication equipment that would keep him alive for the next 6 hours. Around him, 7 other special operations veterans performed the same ritual, the careful dance of professionals preparing for violence. The Delta Force operators moved with a different kind of precision than SEALs, more mechanical but equally deadly. Staff Sergeant Thompson, the team leader, was a soft-spoken Texan who'd earned his reputation during the worst fighting in Iraq. His calm demeanor masked the kind of tactical intelligence that made him ideal for complex missions like this one. "Radio check, all stations," Thompson said into his headset. "Reaper 1, good to go. Reaper 2, good to go." The responses came back crisp and professional, 8 voices confirming that their communication network was functioning perfectly. "Hog 27, Reaper 1, how copy?" Captain Blackfeather's voice crackled through their earpieces, reassuringly steady despite the fact that she was probably already airborne, flying through mountain valleys in complete darkness. "Reaper 1, Hog 27, I have you loud and clear. Currently orbiting at Angels 15, ready to provide support on your call." The insertion helicopter was a Special Operations MH-60 Black Hawk, its engines muffled and rotor blades designed for minimal noise signature. The pilots were from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the Night Stalkers, whose reputation for flying impossible missions in terrible conditions was legendary throughout Special Operations community. As the helicopter lifted off into the Afghan night, Reeves felt the familiar combination of anticipation and dread that preceded every combat mission. No matter how thorough the planning, how precise the intelligence, or how skilled the participants, there were always variables that couldn't be controlled. Weather, equipment failures, human error, enemy capabilities that intelligence had missed. But tonight felt different. Tonight they had an A-10 pilot overhead who'd already proven her skill under pressure. Someone who understood that ground troops depended on precise, timely air support to survive in hostile territory. The psychological comfort of knowing that kind of backup was available couldn't be measured, but it was real. The flight to the target area took 45 minutes, weaving through mountain valleys to avoid enemy radar and maintain the element of surprise. Through his night vision goggles, Reeves could see the landscape passing below, barren ridgelines, scattered villages, and the occasional vehicle headlights marking civilian traffic on mountain roads. 5 minutes out, the pilot announced. Weather is clear, winds calm, perfect night for this kind of work. Thompson's voice came through the team frequency. Final equipment check. Remember, we go in fast and quiet. Ahmad is priority one, but intelligence gathering is also critical. We need phones, computers, documents, anything that tells us who he's working with. The helicopter touched down in a dried riverbed about 2 miles from the target compound, engines running while the assault team fast-roped to the ground. Within 60 seconds, they were moving toward their objective through terrain that looked like the surface of Mars, all rocks and shadows and places where an enemy could hide. Hog 27, Reaper 1. We are feet dry and moving to target. Copy, Reaper 1. I'm repositioning to provide overwatch. No movement detected in your area. The approach to the compound took 90 minutes of careful movement through rocky terrain that offered good concealment, but made silent movement nearly impossible. Every step had to be calculated too.